My wife left me when I was caring for my dying father, but when he made me a millionaire in his will, she came crawling back. I'm Ethan, 36 years old, and I've been married for 8 years. My wife, Amy, and I have 2 children. Along with this, I'm also the only son of my ailing father, Mark. 4 years, Dad has struggled with kidney problems, but his condition worsened over the last 2 to 3 years. Now he needs dialysis twice a week. Initially, he could manage on his own, but over the past year, he started asking me to accompany him. I couldn't bear to see him struggle alone, so I made it a routine to take him to every dialysis session myself. Dad's appointments are on Wednesdays and Saturdays. Saturdays are my days off, so it's manageable. For Wednesdays, my boss kindly allowed me to leave early, with the agreement that I'd make up for the hours by working late from home. I've been with my company for a decade, and my boss has always known me to be hardworking and reliable, so granting this exception wasn't a problem. Unfortunately, the real problem wasn't at work, it was at home. Amy wasn't happy when she found out about my routine. She had always been a little annoyed whenever I took Dad for his appointments occasionally, but now that it became a fixed responsibility, she couldn't hide her displeasure. She said it was pointless to waste my time on Dad because, according to her, nothing I did would ever impress him. To give you some background, my dad used to run a successful merchandising business and had built up a decent amount of wealth over the years. He wanted me to take over his company, but I had a passion for technology. I loved coding and creating software, so after high school, when Dad wanted me to pursue business or management studies, I chose a software engineering degree instead. Dad reluctantly accepted my decision, as long as I was willing to join his business after graduating. But when I started working for a top tech firm instead, he was furious. He tried one last time to get me to join his company after my wedding, but I refused. That was the breaking point. He declared that he would leave everything to charity and not give me a single penny. I didn't budge. I told him I didn't need his money. I'd built a good life for myself, bought a car, and even my own house by the age of 29. I thought I was proving my independence, but it came at the cost of our relationship. 5 years ago, my mom, Linda, passed away from a sudden cardiac arrest, losing her devastated dad. I had moved out at 17 for college, and after graduation I lived on my own. Mom was his only companion, and her death left him completely alone. That tragedy brought us closer again. I started visiting him more often, bringing my kids along so they could spend time with their grandpa. Eventually, Dad stepped down from running the company and handed it over to a trust. That decision changed the dynamic of our relationship. Amy, however, never had a strong bond with my parents. She avoided visiting them when Mom was alive, claiming Mom was too nosy. After Dad announced he'd remove me from his will, Amy openly criticized my parents, calling them mean and selfish. I asked her to stay out of my relationship with them, but she kept pushing, saying it would affect our future, especially the kids' futures. I assured her we were financially secure without Dad's money, but she refused to let it go. When I committed to taking Dad to dialysis every week, Amy went from passive-aggressive to outright hostile. Every Saturday, she'd create plans to make things difficult for me: house parties, deep cleaning, grocery runs, or family outings. I told her she could plan anything on Sundays, but Saturdays were reserved for Dad. She ignored me, then scolded me for being late or missing her plans. Wednesdays were just as bad. She would conveniently go out to see friends, visit family, or attend parties, leaving me to juggle work, cooking, and caring for the kids after returning from Dad's appointments. I was constantly stretched thin, and no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough for her. Things came to a head about 3 months ago. Amy and I had a huge argument because I missed her friend's birthday dinner. It was on a Wednesday, right after Dad's dialysis session. I had told her I couldn't make it, but she insisted I come. After work and the hospital visit, I was completely drained and just wanted to crash on the couch. When I told her I wasn't going, she exploded. "You always put your dad above us," she yelled. "What about me? What about our kids? Do we even matter to you?" I tried to explain that I was doing my best to balance everything, but she wouldn't listen. She accused me of being selfish, said I was prioritizing a man who never appreciated me, and called me a failure as a husband and father. That hurt. I had been running myself ragged trying to make sure everything was taken care of, at home, at work, and for Dad, and still it wasn't enough. The next morning, I woke up to find a note from Amy on the kitchen counter. She had taken the kids to her mother's house and said she needed space to think about our relationship. I was stunned. We'd had fights before, but this was different. She wasn't just angry, she was done. I tried calling her, but she didn't answer. I texted, apologizing for everything and asking her to come back, but all she said was that she needed time. A week turned into 2 and then a month. During that time, I focused on taking care of Dad and trying to keep my head above water at work. I missed my kids terribly, but Amy wouldn't let me see them, claiming she didn't want them to get caught in the middle. About 6 weeks ago, Dad's health took a sudden turn for the worse. His doctor told us he didn't have much time left. I started spending more nights at his house, making sure he was comfortable and not alone. He was weak but still sharp, and we had some good conversations during those nights. He even apologized for being so hard on me about the family business and told me he was proud of the life I'd built. One evening, while we were sitting together, he brought up his will. "I don't want there to be any misunderstandings when I'm gone," he said. He told me he had updated it after Mom's passing, leaving everything to me. I was stunned. "Dad, I don't need your money," I told him. "I just want to be here for you." But he insisted. "It's not about the money, Ethan. It's about making things right." A few days later, Dad passed away peacefully in his sleep. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to face, but I was grateful I could be there with him in his final moments. After the funeral, the lawyer read the will, and as Dad had said, everything was left to me. His house, his business, and all his savings totaling over $2 million. I couldn't believe it. I felt a mix of gratitude and guilt, knowing how much he had wanted me to take over the business. Word of the inheritance spread quickly, and it didn't take long for Amy to come knocking. She showed up at my door with tears in her eyes, saying she wanted to fix things and be a family again. She apologized for leaving and said she realized she had been wrong to put so much pressure on me. "I was scared, Ethan," she said. "I thought we were losing you to your dad, and I didn't know how to handle it. But I see now that you were just trying to do the right thing. Please, can we start over?" I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to believe her, but another part of me couldn't ignore the timing. She had left when things were hard, and now she was back when things were easy. It didn't sit right with me. I told Amy that I needed time to think. Her sudden change of heart felt too convenient, and I wasn't ready to just forgive and forget. I couldn't help but wonder, if Dad hadn't left me the money, would she still have come back? In the weeks that followed, Amy kept trying to prove she was serious about making things work. She would drop by unannounced, sometimes with the kids, saying they missed me and wanted to see their dad. I was always happy to spend time with them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Amy was using them to get to me. She started bringing home-cooked meals, cleaning the house, and even helping with paperwork for Dad's business, all while reminding me of how much she loved me and how sorry she was. One evening, she brought the kids over for dinner. We sat together, ate and laughed like old times, and for a moment it felt like we were a family again. But as soon as the kids went to bed, Amy started talking about our future and how we could use the inheritance to build a better life together. She had ideas: buying a bigger house, paying off debts, starting a college fund for the kids, even investing in a family vacation home. That was the moment it hit me. It wasn't just about fixing our relationship for her. It was about the money. I felt sick. I didn't say anything at first, but I knew I needed to set boundaries. The next day, I called Amy and asked her to meet me for coffee. I told her that I wasn't ready to jump back into our marriage, and that we needed to focus on co-parenting for the time being. I also made it clear that the inheritance was off limits. "This money isn't just for us," I said. "It's for the kids, for their future. I won't let it become a point of contention between us." Amy didn't take it well. She accused me of being selfish and holding a grudge. "I'm trying to make things right, Ethan," she said. "Why can't you see that? I'm your wife. We're supposed to share everything." I told her that trust takes time to rebuild, and that I needed her to respect my decision. She stormed out, leaving me sitting there, feeling both angry and relieved. At least now everything was out in the open. A few days later, my brother Eric called. He and I hadn't spoken much since Dad's passing, but he had always been supportive, even if we weren't particularly close. He said he'd heard about the inheritance and wanted to make sure I was okay. At first I thought he was going to ask for money too, but instead he surprised me. "Don't let anyone guilt you into giving away what Dad left you," he said. "You earned his respect, Ethan. He wouldn't have left it all to you if he didn't think you deserved it." Hearing that meant a lot, especially coming from Eric, who had always been closer to Dad than I was. He reminded me that the money wasn't just a windfall. It was a responsibility. Dad trusted me to use it wisely, and I wasn't going to let him down. Over the next few weeks, I focused on stabilizing my life. I decided to put most of the inheritance into a trust for the kids, ensuring that their future would be secure no matter what happened. I kept some aside to pay off my own debts and invest in expanding Dad's business, which I now plan to manage part-time while keeping my job. Amy, meanwhile, kept pushing for reconciliation. She said all the right things, but I couldn't ignore how her behavior had changed after learning about the money. I started going to therapy to sort through my feelings and figure out what I really wanted. In one session, my therapist asked me, "Do you trust Amy enough to let her back into your life? Or are you just afraid of being alone?" That question hit me hard. I realized that my hesitation wasn't just about the money, it was about trust. Amy had left when I needed her most, and I wasn't sure I could ever fully rely on her again. I decided to take things slow, not just with Amy but with everyone. The inheritance had shifted the dynamics of all my relationships, and I needed to figure out who was genuine and who wasn't. Amy wasn't the only one acting differently. Extended family members and even a few old friends had started reaching out, offering friendly advice or reminiscing about the good old days. It was exhausting, but it also clarified who I could trust. Amy's persistence didn't wane, though. She kept showing up, uninvited, and even started leaving notes in my mailbox or sending messages through the kids. "I just want to make things right," she'd say, but her actions always seemed to circle back to the money. One day, she dropped by with a lawyer to discuss setting up a joint financial plan. I was furious. "You're not entitled to this money, Amy," I said. "It's not a prize you can claim by showing up now. You left me when I had nothing. Why should I share this with you now?" She didn't have a response, just a blank stare that eventually turned into tears. "I was scared, Ethan," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't know how to handle everything back then. I made mistakes, but I want to fix them." For a moment I almost softened, but then I remembered all the times she'd ignored my calls, left me to handle the bills, and avoided the tough conversations. "Fixing this isn't about the money," I told her. "It's about rebuilding trust, and that's not something you can rush or buy." Around the same time, I had another conversation with Eric. He suggested that I take a break, maybe even go on a short trip to clear my head. "You've been through a lot," he said. "You need to figure out what you want, not what everyone else expects from you." It was good advice. I arranged for the kids to stay with Amy for a weekend and booked a quiet cabin out of town. The time away helped me put things in perspective. I realized that I'd spent too much time trying to prove my worth to everyone else. My parents, Amy, even myself. The money was a gift, but it was also a burden. I couldn't let it define me or my relationships. When I got back, I felt more grounded. I sat Amy down and told her exactly how I felt. "I'm willing to co-parent with you, and I'll always respect the fact that you're the mother of our children," I said. "But I'm not ready to be in a relationship with you again. Not now, and maybe not ever." She cried, but I could tell she wasn't entirely surprised. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'll give you space." Over the next few months, I focused on the kids, my work, and honoring Dad's legacy. I put a portion of the inheritance into charitable causes he cared about. Scholarships for underprivileged students and grants for small business owners. I expanded his business and turned it into something sustainable, creating jobs for others in the community. Amy eventually stopped trying to push her way back into my life. She seemed to accept that our relationship was over, and we settled into a rhythm as co-parents. My brother Eric and I grew closer, bonding over shared memories of Dad and the lessons he taught us. I even started dating again cautiously, though I kept that part of my life separate from everything else. Looking back, I'm grateful for the challenges I faced after inheriting the money. They forced me to reevaluate my relationships and prioritize what really mattered. I learned that love, trust, and respect are far more valuable than any amount of money, and those are the things I'll work to pass on to my kids. As for Amy, I hope she finds peace and happiness in her own way, just as I'm finding mine. But one thing is certain. I'm finally living life on my terms and I'm not looking back.